I've hiked alone most of my adult life, and I've always found a kind of quiet comfort in the woods, especially the Appalachian trails. But that morning, late in the fall, when the leaves were mostly down and the air had that cold bite to it, I felt something I hadn't felt since I was a kid wandering too deep into the forest behind my grandparents' house. A sense that the woods weren't mine to be in. Like I'd stepped into something's territory without realizing it. It wasn't even anything dramatic. No strange noise. No creature stepping out from behind a tree. Just wrong air. Thick and metallic, almost like the sky was building up to a storm that wasn't showing yet. Even the birds seemed muted. A few chirps here and there, but mostly silence. The kind that clings to you, sits on your shoulders, makes your breathing sound too loud in your own ears. Still, I told myself it was fine. I'd come all that way. I wasn't going to turn around just because the morning felt off. About a mile in, the trail narrowed into one of those long, slow climbs that feels like it never really starts and never really ends. That's when I first heard it. Footsteps behind me. Soft, dragging steps. Not heavy enough to be a person with purpose. Not light enough to be an animal running. Just following. I stopped. The footsteps stopped. Half a second after. I remember smiling to myself, shaking it off like it was nothing. Maybe a stray deer that happened to fall into rhythm with me. It's happened before. The woods are weird that way. Sounds bounce, echo, overlap with your own. But then I started walking again, and so did the footsteps. Same rhythm. Same distance behind me. I slowed down slightly, almost testing it without meaning to. The sound slowed with me, then stopped exactly when I stopped. I tried to look back without fully turning my head, catching glimpses between the trees, but nothing stood out. Just tall trunks, old moss, and the stillness of late autumn forest. I kept going, ignoring it the best I could. I even hummed under my breath, to hear something besides the crunch of leaves. But the footsteps stayed. Not close enough for me to feel danger, but close enough that I felt observed. Like someone was deliberately staying just far enough behind to avoid being seen. It wasn't until the ridge section that things shifted from unsettling to something I'd call fear. The ridge path is narrow, tight, and has a drop on one side you could roll down for a good 100 yards. You always listen carefully on that stretch. Loose gravel, shifting dirt, the normal stuff that could get you hurt. That's why I heard it so clearly when it happened. Breathing. Not mine. A faint, shaky inhale right behind me. Close enough that for a second, I thought someone had leaned over my shoulder. I whipped around so fast I almost lost my footing. But the trail behind me was empty. Not a single branch moved. Not a squirrel darting across the ground. Just stillness. And an immediate silence that hit so suddenly, it made my ears ring. The breath, whatever made it, it didn't belong there. It didn't feel like a hiker who wandered off. It felt like something that lived in silence, something unused to breathing near people. I stood there far too long, listening to absolutely nothing. The woods around me felt dead. Braced for something. Listening with me. I should have turned back then. Every instinct in my body was telling me to. But fear has this strange way of convincing you to push forward instead of retreating. Moving forward felt like the only way to keep whatever was behind me. Behind me. So I kept walking, the ridge curving slowly, and I forced myself not to look back again. I felt watched the entire time, like dozens of eyes were tucked away in the timberline, deciding what to make of me. By the time I reached the flatter section of the route, the sun was already dipping low, washing everything in that dim golden light that shouldn't be scary but somehow always is out there. My nerves were already shot when I saw it. Something ducking behind a tree. It wasn't clear, not fully. Just the shape of a head or a shoulder pulling back out of view the moment I glanced its direction. Too large to be a raccoon or fox. Too smooth of a movement to be something clumsy like a bear. I stopped walking. My heart was hammering, but I didn't hear the footsteps this time. I didn't hear anything. No wind. No animals. Not even my own breath for a second. Then I saw it again. 2 trees over. A slight shift. A dark outline slipping behind bark. Not approaching. Not leaving. Just staying parallel with me, like it was pacing me through the woods. I didn't call out. I didn't ask if someone was there. I didn't want a response. By dusk, the fear turned into panic. I didn't feel like I was alone on a trail anymore. I felt like I was being herded. Like every bend in the path was guiding me someplace the forest knew I'd have to pass. Every time I walked faster, I heard something matching me in the underbrush. Not loudly. Just enough to let me know it was there. When the parking lot was finally close, maybe 2 miles out, I started running. I tried to keep it controlled at first, but the moment I heard the footsteps behind me break into a matching run, every bit of control vanished. I tore down that path like my life was tied to how fast I could make it out. The footsteps weren't heavy, not thundering like a person sprinting, but they were there. Quick, light, almost like someone running barefoot on leaves. The scariest part was how close they sounded. Even with my breath burning in my chest, even with my boots hitting the ground hard, I could hear them. Right behind me. And then, just as the parking lot came into view through the trees, all the footsteps, mine and whatever was behind me, seemed to blend into one frantic rhythm. It felt like the forest itself was shaking. The moment my boots hit gravel, everything stopped. All at once. The woods behind me went completely silent, as if every sound had been sucked out of the air. But something else happened too. Something that still makes my stomach twist when I think about it. The forest exhaled. It wasn't wind. It wasn't branches shifting. It was a single, drawn-out breath, low and hollow, pushing out from the tree line like the woods themselves had been holding it in. I stood frozen. My body wanted to keep running, but my legs were locked. I stared into the trees, waiting for something to step out, some explanation for everything that had happened. Nothing came. Just silence. When I finally got myself to move, I got into my car and didn't look back at the trailhead. Not once. Even as I drove away, my hands shook on the steering wheel. Every shadow between the trees looked like it had weight to it, like something was standing just out of sight, watching me leave. I haven't hiked that trail again. I won't. Sometimes, late at night when the house gets too quiet, I swear I hear that same soft, dragging step somewhere in the hallway. The same faint breath just behind my shoulder. Like whatever paced me through the woods found a way to follow the sound of my footsteps home. And every time I hear it, I remember that long exhale the forest let out when I escaped, like it hadn't wanted me to leave. Like it was disappointed. Or worse, like it wasn't finished with me yet. The sun was low enough that the sky had that bruised purple tint, the kind that makes the woods look older than they really are, when I reached the 12th switchback on that old ranger route. Most people don't hike that trail anymore. It's steep, overgrown in places, and the last few miles don't feel like a trail at all. Just an animal path pressed into the ridge by years of weather. I'd been warned about it more than once, mostly by older hikers who said it was too easy to get turned around, too easy to slip, too easy to feel like something was following you without ever seeing it. But I'd driven almost 3 hours to get there, and the weather had been clear all day, so turning back felt like admitting I'd wasted my time. I told myself I'd be quick, even though I already knew sundown was coming faster than I wanted it to. The 12th switchback curves tight around a cluster of pines, the kind that block out light even in the middle of the afternoon. As I moved through it, the temperature dropped hard enough that I felt it straight through my jacket. The air had a bite to it, like the forest was warning me that I didn't have as much time as I thought. I kept pushing forward, but my pace slowed without me meaning to. Something felt off. Not threatening, just aware. Like the woods were watching me walk through and deciding what to do about it. That's when I saw the light. A faint glow flickering deeper into the trees. Too soft to be sunlight and too steady to be reflection. I stopped and squinted through the branches. My first thought was that it was another hiker with a headlamp, maybe someone who'd gotten an early start on their descent. But the glow wasn't bobbing the way a headlamp normally would. It swayed. Smooth and slow, like something hanging from a hand. A lantern. It made no sense. Nobody brings lanterns on backcountry trails anymore. Not unless they're camping, and even then, not this far up. The deeper I stared, the more wrong it felt. The light was there, flickering like an old kerosene lamp, but it didn't illuminate anything around it. No ground. No bark. No silhouette. Then a shape stepped into it. A woman's figure, standing so still she could have been carved into the trees. I couldn't see details, just the outline of her body and the small lantern dangling from her hand. Or at least it looked like her hand. Her arm didn't move with the lantern. It was stiff, held close to her side, while the lantern swayed gently as if someone else was swinging it. I don't know why I called out. Habit, maybe. The sound of my voice felt wrong the moment it left my throat. The cold air swallowed it immediately, like it didn't want the noise spreading through the trees. She didn't react. Not even a twitch. The lantern flickered once. Then again. Then it went out completely. I stood there staring into darkness so thick it looked unreal. It was as if the light had never been there. No silhouette. No glow. Nothing but pine trunks fading into shadow. I turned to head back down the trail. I wasn't going to pretend I wasn't scared anymore. And the moment I did, she was there. Not close enough to touch, but far closer than she had been. Just a few yards up the trail, standing off to the side, her body angled toward me like she'd turned without moving her feet. Her shape looked wrong now. Like her shoulders weren't aligned with her head. Like her posture was forced into a position the body wasn't built for. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. I didn't move. If she had taken a single step, I think my legs would have given out. But she stayed still. Completely still except for something subtle. Something I only noticed because my eyes were locked on her. The fabric of her clothing, or what I thought was clothing, seemed to shift without wind. A slow ripple, like the trail heat was distorting her shape even though the air was freezing cold. I forced my body to turn away again. I didn't run, but I moved fast, every instinct screaming at me not to look back. I made it maybe 20 steps before I heard it. Twigs snapping behind me. Not like someone walking carefully. Not like someone trying to approach quietly. Fast. Sharp. Erratic. Like fingers tapping across the forest floor. I didn't look. I couldn't. My brain decided for me, run. I sprinted harder than I ever have down a trail, barely paying attention to my footing, tearing down the switchback with branches whipping against my arms and face. I felt something behind me. I can't put it into words well. It wasn't footsteps. It wasn't breathing. It was presence, keeping up with me without ever making enough noise for my mind to understand what kind of movement it was using. When I reached the first trail sign, the sound stopped instantly. Not gradually fading. Not slowing. Just gone, like someone threw a switch that shut off the entire forest. My lungs burned and I bent over with my hands on my knees, staring at the dirt, too afraid to lift my head because deep down, I knew if I did, she might still be standing there. Closer than before. Maybe right behind me. I forced myself to lift my head eventually. Nothing was there. The woods looked normal again. Still dark, still unsettling, but normal in the way Appalachian forests get at dusk. Shadowed, quiet, patient. I didn't hike the rest of the trail. I didn't even walk. I jogged the entire way back to the trailhead, and even then I didn't stop moving until I was inside my car with the doors locked. My hands were shaking so hard I fumbled my keys twice before getting the engine started. The whole drive home, I kept expecting to see that flickering lantern in my rearview mirror. Every time another car passed or a distant porch light came into view, my heart jumped so hard it hurt. For weeks afterward, I had dreams about that woman. In every one of them, she wasn't moving. She was just standing somewhere I shouldn't have seen her. In the tree line behind my house on the far side of a hallway, in the reflection of my living room window after sundown. The lantern would sway in her hand. Even though her arm never shifted. The light would flicker twice, then go out, and the dream would end with the sound of snapping twigs rushing toward me. I don't hike after sunset anymore. I don't even drive mountain roads past dark if I can help it. Because some nights, when the air gets cold and heavy the way it did on that switchback, I swear I see a faint glow flickering between distant trees. Not bright enough to be fire. Not steady enough to be a flashlight. Just enough to let me know that something is still out there, still watching, still waiting for the sun to drop low enough that I won't see her until she's already too close. I only stopped at that shelter above mile marker 22 because the storm caught me faster than I expected. The wind had been pushing at my back all afternoon, and I'd hoped to beat it to the ridge, but the clouds spilled over the peaks like something alive, swallowing the trail in rolling gray. By the time the first drops hit, they were cold and heavy, and the temperature seemed to fall 10 degrees in minutes. I wasn't wearing the kind of gear you want to test in mountain weather, so when I saw the faint outline of the old trail spur, barely visible under leaves and overgrowth, I took it. I wasn't expecting anything good, mostly just a break from the rain, but the shelter appeared after a few minutes, tucked behind a row of twisted laurel, like it was hiding from the trail itself. Half the roof sagged inward and the boards looked soft with rot, but in that moment it felt like relief. Inside, the first thing I noticed was how still the air felt. The rain outside hadn't picked up yet, but in the shelter it already felt sealed off from the world, like stepping into a cellar. My flashlight caught dust suspended in the air, stubborn and unmoving, as if the particles were hanging on threads. The second thing I saw were the carvings. I thought they were graffiti at first, maybe initials or little doodles left by bored hikers, but when I got closer, my stomach tightened. They were tally marks, precise, evenly spaced, and covering nearly every plank. Some were deep, some shallow, some faded with age. They ran up the walls, across the beams, even around the window frame. Hundreds of them. Maybe thousands. It reminded me of prison stories, the kind where a man scratches time into the walls until the walls stop looking like anything but the passing of days. I told myself someone must have used this place as a long-term way station. Some thru-hikers like to leave strange patterns behind. Maybe it was a ritual, or a record of shelters visited. I tried to rationalize it, tried to ignore the tightness growing in my chest, the way the stale air pushed against me in slow waves. In the far corner, a backpack sat propped neatly against the wall. Clean. Intact. Not waterlogged or torn like the shelter around it. Inside, clothes were folded with almost unnatural care, shirts, socks, a bandana, all arranged like a store display. That was the first moment where something inside me whispered to leave. Not shouted, just whispered it, slow and steady, the way you talk to a nervous animal before it bolts. But the rain started hitting then, fast and sharp, rattling the loose boards overhead. It echoed in the beams, a deep hollow thump like someone walking on a roof in heavy boots. I stepped back from the backpack and sat on the dry corner of the floor, telling myself it wasn't unusual. Hikers disappear sometimes. They abandon gear. Maybe he left early. Maybe he'd come back after fetching water. I told myself a lot of things I didn't believe. It was when the wind picked up that I heard the first inhale. It didn't come from the doorway, or the broken window, or even from the storm outside. It came from directly behind me. A slow, wet, dragging breath, the kind you hear when someone's been crying too long or when they're trying to breathe through congestion. The kind that feels too close before you can think. I spun so fast my backpack slid off my shoulder, and the flashlight beam slashed across dust and boards and the far wall, lighting up only empty space. Empty corners. Empty doorway. Nothing moved. But the air still felt disturbed, like someone had walked past me. I edged back toward the entrance, telling myself it had to be something structural. An old shelter, shifting with the wind, pulling air through gaps. But the storm hadn't hit full force yet. The boards weren't shaking. And that inhale, it had rhythm, intention, like lungs. It wasn't the sound of old wood settling. It was the sound of someone trying not to be heard. I stayed awake for hours after that, sitting with my back against the one solid wall, my flashlight pointed toward the carvings. Every time I blinked, the tally marks looked different. Maybe it was the beam shaking in my hand, or the storm distorting shadows, but sometimes they looked like they were spreading, growing. Occasionally a mark I knew I hadn't seen before would stand out, brighter, cleaner, like it had just been scratched. I kept telling myself I was imagining it. Around midnight the storm hit hard enough to shake the shelter like a boat. Wind slammed against the walls with cracking force, and water blew in through the open side in cold misty bursts. Even then, the air inside the shelter stayed strangely still. It was like the storm was pushing against an invisible barrier right at the entrance, never quite breaking through. That was when I heard the second breath. Not behind me this time, above me. The roof beams creaked under the pressure of the storm, but this sound wasn't wood. It was soft and low and deliberate, coming from the dark triangle of shadow where the roof sagged. Too controlled to be an animal. Too close to speech. If it had been just one breath, maybe I could have told myself it was the wind forcing air through cracks. But it was followed by another. And another. Slow, ragged, like something just above me was matching its breathing to mine and then adjusting, trying to sync with it. I stood up fast. My flashlight hit the roof, the beam trembling. Dust cascaded down in tiny streams. The shadows didn't move, but the sound stopped instantly, as if whatever made it was holding its breath. I wanted to run, but stepping out into the throat of that storm felt like walking into danger too. Lightning cracked across the ridge, white and blinding, illuminating the forest for half a second in a way that made every tree look wrong and skeletal. Something in me said to stay put. Something else said staying was worse. In the end, it didn't matter, because the rain hit the entrance in a sideways sheet that blocked everything behind it. I sat awake until the worst of the storm passed. The breathing didn't return. Not exactly. But every so often I'd feel a shift behind me, just enough to make the hairs on my arms rise, and when I turned, the dust in the flashlight beam would swirl in slow spirals, as if something invisible had just moved through it. Just before dawn, when the storm finally softened into a slow drizzle, I noticed something at the base of the wall near the floor. A new tally mark. Bright, fresh-cut wood surrounded by tight curls of shavings that hadn't been there hours before. The edges were so clean they almost glowed. It hadn't been there when I arrived. I was certain of that. Not just certain, but cold with the knowledge of it, the same way you know when someone has entered a room even if you didn't hear them. I crouched toward it slowly, my stomach turning. The wood curls were still damp. Not from storm water, there was none on that side of the shelter, but from something else. It was almost like whoever carved it had wet hands. Or something had dripped. The backpack in the corner was no longer standing upright. It had fallen over as if brushed by a foot, or nudged aside. That was enough. I didn't wait for sunrise, didn't wait to see if the breathing returned or if another tally mark would appear. I grabbed my things in one motion and left the shelter without looking back. The forest outside was soaked and silent, and for a few moments the drizzle hitting leaves sounded like whispering. I forced myself down the trail, twisting through brush until I found the main path again. But the thing that stayed with me the most wasn't the breathing or the tally marks or the sense that someone had been in that shelter with me the whole night. It's what I saw when I finally glanced over my shoulder. Up on the ridge, where the broken roof leaned against the storm-dark sky, something shifted inside the shelter. Not a figure. Not movement. Just absence. A darker patch of dark, the way a room looks when someone has just stepped out of sight but hasn't fully left yet. And even though I couldn't hear it over the dripping leaves, I swear I felt a breath on the back of my neck. Slow, deliberate, and perfectly timed with mine. I don't know how long that shelter's been there, or who made those tally marks, but I know one of them belongs to me now. And every time I think about it, I wonder if that last inhale wasn't a sound at all. Maybe it was the place remembering me, adding me to whatever count it's been keeping for who knows how long. And sometimes, when I'm alone or the house goes quiet at night, I swear I hear a breath behind me, matching mine. I'd been on Panther Creek Trail a few times before, mostly day hikes, nothing overnight. The place always felt a little hollow, like sound didn't travel right. Even the birds seemed to call from farther away than they actually were. Still, I wanted a quiet night alone in the woods, something to clear my head before winter set in. I parked at the small gravel pull-off, signed the trail sheet, and headed in with enough gear for a simple one-night stay. The air had that late fall bite, sharp but clean, and the forest floor was stiff with frozen leaves. About 2 miles in, the light started thinning out through the trees, curling into long shadows. That was when I saw the first shape glide across the trail about 20 yards ahead. It was low to the ground, too low for a deer and too stretched out for any kind of dog. At first my brain latched onto the idea of a bear cub, but it moved wrong. More like something trying to learn its own body, limbs bending at angles that didn't make sense. It slid into the brush without a sound, not even a crack of twigs. I told myself I probably caught the tail end of a bobcat and kept hiking. But another 100 yards later, I saw it again. Same height. Same gliding motion. This time it paused in the middle of the trail, just long enough for me to notice how narrow it was, like its body flattened against the dirt before it slinked away. I stayed still for a few seconds, waiting to hear movement or sniffing or anything normal. Nothing came. The air felt plugged up, like the forest didn't want to acknowledge whatever that thing was. I made camp near the creek around dusk, a small clearing beside a fallen oak, nothing fancy. The water ran slow and steady, but even its sound felt distant. While boiling a bit of ramen, I kept thinking about that thin, crawling shape. Every hiker deals with strange animal encounters now and then, but this one stuck to my ribs, like my body recognized something my brain didn't want to name. It started around 9. I was just settling into the tent when I heard it. Leaves shifting in a dragging motion, somewhere to my right. Not stepping. Dragging. Like something pulling itself hand over hand across the ground. I turned off my headlamp and listened harder, convincing myself it was just wind scraping through dry leaves, but the movement had rhythm. It would scrape, pause, scrape again, each time sounding closer. I slid open the tent just enough to shine my flashlight toward the tree line. The second the beam cut through the dark, the noise stopped. Not faded. Stopped. Like something froze in place the instant the light touched the clearing. I held the beam there for a long stretch, waiting for eyeshine or the flick of a tail. Nothing. When I turned the light off, the forest held its breath for maybe 2 seconds, and then the dragging started again, this time almost behind the tent. I barely slept. Every 30 minutes or so, the sound would sweep closer, then drift away, then circle back. Around 2 in the morning, the temperature dropped to the kind that bites your fingers despite gloves. I must have drifted off because what woke me wasn't the dragging but the pressure. Something pressed against the thin fabric wall of the tent, right next to my head. Slow pressure like someone pushing with their fingertips, testing the shape of what was inside. I couldn't breathe. I felt its weight move along the tent wall, dragging the nylon inward. Too low to be a bear, too deliberate to be any normal animal. And then I heard the breathing. It was shallow, as if the lungs moving below were working harder than they should. Not a growl, not sniffing. Just slow, constricted breaths right outside my tent. I didn't move. Didn't blink. Part of me expected a handprint to press through the fabric, or a face to flatten against it. The pressure stayed for maybe a full minute, then drifted to the far side of the tent, and finally went quiet. Sometime near dawn the forest shifted color, turning from deep black to that cold pre-morning blue. The instant the light rose enough to see, the pressure vanished like it had never been there. I unzipped the tent quickly, almost tearing it. The clearing looked normal at first glance, but when I stepped outside, my stomach dropped. Drag marks circled the tent in wide loops, weaving in and out like whatever moved around me had crawled the perimeter dozens of times. The marks weren't paw prints or boot prints, just long, smooth indentations, like elbows or forearms pulling across the dirt. My hands were shaking so bad I barely packed my gear. I didn't bother making breakfast, didn't refill water, didn't even check for forgotten items. I just shoved everything into my pack and started down the trail. The sun was barely up, but the woods still felt drained of color. Every sound echoed weirdly, and despite walking fast, I never felt like I was making progress. Half a mile from the trailhead, just when I thought the nightmare was behind me, I heard it again. That dragging, off to my left. Not close, but not far either. I kept moving, trying not to break into a run, but the sound stayed with me, matching my pace. Every time I slowed, it slowed. Every time I sped up, it dragged quicker. I didn't dare look into the trees. When the parking lot finally came into view through the thinning brush, the dragging stopped. Clean break. Silent. Like it had peeled itself away the moment the woods began to open. I walked straight to my car without turning around once. Only when the doors were locked and the engine running did I finally look back down the trail. Nothing moved. The trees were perfectly still, but the silence had weight to it, like something was holding its breath just out of sight. I haven't set foot on Panther Creek since. I don't camp alone much anymore either. Sometimes, when the nights are really cold and the wind is quiet, I swear I can hear that dragging sound again. Slow, deliberate, following me just a few steps behind my memory. I'd planned that trip as a sort of reset. 3 days alone in the woods, nothing but ridge lines, cold river water, and the sound of my own footsteps. I'd crossed that same shallow river a few times on earlier hikes, so when I approached it from the south side near late afternoon, I wasn't expecting anything except slick rocks and freezing toes. The water ran low that time of year, thin enough for sunlight to touch the stones underneath. I was halfway across, boots in hand, when I noticed someone upstream. A man stood dead center in the river, facing away from me. The water reached just above his ankles, but he didn't move. His shoulders were rigid, arms hanging too straight, like he was deliberately keeping every part of himself still. I assumed he was a fisherman at first, but he had no pole, no gear, not even a hat. His clothes looked dark and soaked, clinging to him. What bothered me most was the water around him. It barely disturbed. The current split around his legs as if he wasn't part of the river at all. I called out, my voice carrying far in the open space. He didn't turn, didn't flinch, didn't even drop his shoulders the way people do when they hear something unexpected. He just stood there as if he'd been carved into place. I took a few more steps across the rocks, glanced down for footing, and when I looked back up, he was gone. No splash, no ripples, no movement downstream. Just empty water and the steady murmur of the current. I told myself I'd imagined how still he was, that maybe he'd stepped behind some brush or moved while I blinked. But the unease clung to me while I made camp a few hundred yards downstream. I set up near a small rise on the bank where I could keep an eye on the river. The sun was beginning to sink behind the ridge, painting everything in that deep orange hush that feels both warm and lonely. I was gathering firewood when I heard it, the river shifting in a way it hadn't before. A heavier disturbance, not loud but deliberate. I walked to the edge of the bank, and my stomach dropped. The man was there again, same spot in the river, except this time he was facing toward me. The water around him was unnaturally still. Not slowed still, as if it didn't dare move. His face was shadowed by the fading light, so I couldn't see his features. But I could feel the direction of his gaze, like a weight settling on my chest. I called out again, weaker this time. Nothing. The only answer was the faint rustle of wind through dead leaves behind me. I backed away slowly, returned to camp, and tried to focus on getting the fire going. I kept glancing toward the river even though I couldn't see him from where I sat. Every few minutes the hairs on my neck rose, like something was watching me through the trees. Just before full dark, I heard the water shift again. Not a splash, something more controlled. When I looked toward the river, the man was raising his right arm, slow and stiff, until it pointed past me toward the tree-line. My breath caught. I turned toward the trees expecting to see movement, an animal, another hiker, anything that made sense. But there was nothing. Just dense shadows, leaning pines, and the distant groan of the forest settling for the night. When I looked back, he was gone. Again. No sound, no ripples, no footprints on the riverbank. The river looked untouched, as if nothing had stood there at all. I stayed awake longer than I planned, waiting to see if he returned. The fire cracked softly, fighting the cold creeping in from the river. Eventually exhaustion won, and I crawled into my tent. It didn't take long for the dreams to start. I dreamed of water. Shallow water disturbed by footsteps. Not splashing, but walking slow and deliberate, like someone pacing through a flooded basement. I heard each step grow closer, the water sucking against skin and fabric. In the dream, I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. All I could do was listen as those wet steps circled the tent, pausing near my head. Around dawn, when pale gray light seeped through the nylon, I bolted upright. The dream clung to me like humidity, thick and suffocating. I unzipped the tent and stepped outside, the cold morning air sharper than I expected. At first, nothing looked unusual. Just dew-covered leaves, the faint steam of the river, and the ashes of last night's fire. Then I saw them. Wet prints, bare footprints, starting from the exact center of the river and leading in a straight line to my camp. They were fresh, the kind of wet that only clings for minutes before drying. Each print was clear, human, and deep enough to show the weight behind each step. The trail ended less than 3 feet from my tent door. No prints led back to the river. I packed everything in under 10 minutes. Didn't bother eating, didn't bother checking my map. I just wanted distance between me and that river. Even as I hiked out, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing motionless in the shallows, watching me leave. I've passed plenty of rivers since then, some bigger, some quieter, some running so clear you can see every stone underneath. But whenever I look long enough, I still get the strange feeling that something could be standing there, just beneath the surface, perfectly still, waiting for me to see it again. I reached the fire tower just after dusk, the sky still holding onto the last bit of blue before night took over completely. I'd always wanted to see what the mountains looked like from a tower after dark, the valleys turning to silhouettes and the ridges lined with starlight. People always told me not to climb those old structures alone. Too unstable, too remote, too many stories about things echoing around them at night. But I'd hiked that trail enough times in daylight to feel familiar with it, and I told myself fear was the only thing making those towers seem haunted. I wanted to prove to myself that fear had no real weight. The metal frame groaned as I stepped onto the first stair. The sound carried farther than it should have, bouncing between the surrounding trees. Each footstep rang sharp and hollow, and with every level I climbed the woods grew quieter, like the forest was listening. About halfway up, I paused to catch my breath. That's when I heard it. Another footstep on the stairs below me. Slow. Not heavy, just steady, like someone taking their time. I turned my headlamp downward, but the angle of the structure blocked most of my view. All I saw was black steel disappearing into deeper darkness. I called out, thinking maybe another hiker had followed me up. My voice sounded too small. I took another step. The footsteps below took another step as well, perfectly matching my pace. The rhythm was wrong though. My steps were careful and deliberate, but the ones behind me sounded almost lazy, as if whoever it was had no reason to hurry. My neck tightened, and when I reached the final flight, I practically jogged the last steps to the top platform. When I swung the headlamp back down the stairway, the sound stopped. The stairs were empty. Not even dust shifting in the breeze. Inside the tower cabin, the temperature dropped instantly. The air bit at my skin in a way the night outside hadn't. It was the kind of cold that felt like stepping into a basement. Still, old and untouched. My breath fogged the window panes as I looked out over the ridgeline. For a moment, the view made me forget the climb entirely. The mountains rolled out in every direction, their silhouettes layered like torn paper, and the stars above them seemed impossibly bright. Then I heard someone climb the last few steps. There was no mistaking it this time. Metal flexing, slow footfalls ascending, the final clank of a boot meeting the top landing. I froze. The doorknob didn't turn. The door didn't move. But I heard the footsteps enter anyway. Soft, measured, walking directly across the metal floorboards toward the center of the cabin where I stood. I spun around with the headlamp, sweeping the corners. The beam caught floating dust, nothing else. But the steps kept moving. They circled me, slow and methodical, like someone was studying me. The sound was unmistakable. Weight shifting lightly on old metal. My heart pounded so hard it drowned out the wind outside. I backed against the far wall, lamp shaking in my hand, but no matter where I pointed it, the light showed nothing except the shifting dust motes. Then the footsteps stopped right beside me. The air pressed cold against my ear, as though someone was leaning in close. I didn't breathe. For a long few seconds, nothing happened. The tower seemed to hold its breath with me. And then I heard it. A whisper, coming from the corner behind me. Not just any whisper, my voice. Repeating the exact words I'd spoken on the trail earlier that day, when I'd muttered to myself, "Should have brought warmer layers." The voice said it exactly as I had. Same tone, same rhythm, same tired exhale at the end. Hearing it from the darkness behind me turned my knees weak. I kept telling myself it was echoing somehow, but echoes don't copy inflection. They don't wait hours to return the words. The whisper kept repeating, softer each time, like it was fading or moving farther away. My throat tightened until I couldn't swallow. I turned toward the corner, but my headlamp cut through dusty emptiness. That broke me. I bolted for the door, nearly tripping down the first few stairs. The tower moaned and rattled with every step I took downward, like it was trying to shake me loose. I didn't stop until my boots hit solid earth, and even then I kept running until the tower was hidden behind a wall of trees. All the way down the trail, I felt like something was following just out of reach. No footsteps this time, just the sense of presence like breath on the back of my neck. When I reached my car, my hands trembled too hard to fit the key in at first. I didn't look back at the ridge. I didn't want to see the tower silhouetted against the sky, or worse, see someone standing at the top. I haven't climbed a fire tower since. I still hike, but I stay on the ground. Even now, years later, every so often when the wind hits just right, I swear I hear footsteps behind me on metal stairs, climbing at their own slow pace, never in a hurry to catch up. I started that hike thinking it would be routine, a ridge trail I'd walked before, narrow but manageable, with enough daylight left to make a loop before sunset. The forest had that late autumn hush, the kind where even the wind seems too shy to move through the needles. I didn't expect the quiet to feel oppressive, but by the time I hit the first switchback, it already did. Everything was sharp and still, the ridge carved in deep shadows, and the scent of decaying pine hung low, thick with moisture from the morning frost. I noticed it first as a movement, or what I thought was movement, between two pines about 100 yards off the trail. At first, my brain filled in the shape as another hiker. A dark figure, hunched slightly, leaning against the trunk. But something didn't fit. For one, it didn't shift, not a muscle. Not the way a person adjusts their stance when standing alone for long periods. I squinted, took a slow step, and the figure remained fixed. Then I moved around a bend in the trail, and there it was again, between two other pines perfectly vertical, facing me. I froze for a heartbeat, telling myself it had to be a trick of distance or shadow, a convergence of branches and light. But the same posture, the same placement. It wasn't moving, and it always seemed to be facing me. I forced myself to keep walking, focusing on the crunch of leaves under my boots. I tried to tell myself the forest was playing tricks with perspective, that ridges fold and stretch shapes in impossible ways. But then I stopped to drink from my bottle, and above me came the sound. Soft clicking, rhythmic, deliberate, like teeth tapping together. I jerked my head upward, half expecting a bird or squirrel. There was nothing, only long pines leaning in over the trail, swaying gently, their needles whispering against each other. My pulse jumped. I swallowed hard, telling myself it was wind or frost loosening along the branches, but the clicks had a cadence, a sort of patience, like someone or something was testing me. The trail climbed higher, the ridge narrowing so that I felt hemmed in on both sides. The trees were tight now, almost pressing, roots twisting into the dirt at odd angles. The air was thin, dry, and cold. That's when I heard it. A low, rasping whisper, strained and broken, carrying my name. My exact name. I froze, water bottle in hand, heart hammering. I hadn't told anyone my name on this hike. My voice caught in my throat, the fog of breath forming a thin halo around me. I looked left, right, up, down, nothing moved. No one was on the trail. Not even a shadow. But the pine needles at my boots were bent inward, pressed into the ground as if someone had been standing right there, breathing against my neck. I wanted to rationalize it, to find a logical explanation. Maybe a lost hiker had called out and wandered unseen. Maybe a trick of acoustics carried my own muttered words back to me. But the needles told another story. The spacing, the pressure, they had the weight of deliberate presence. It wasn't a bird. It wasn't the wind. And whatever it was, it hadn't moved from place to place like a normal person. It was always just outside my reach, at the corner of my vision, pressing into the trail with invisible eyes. I started moving faster, but the feeling didn't let up. Every turn of the trail, every small rise, I expected to see the figure, but the distance would shift unnaturally. Between trees, farther off than seemed possible, always aligned with me, always facing. I didn't look back. I forced my eyes down on the path, breathing hard, the cold air biting my lungs. The clicking followed intermittently, always in time with my steps, sometimes before I took them, sometimes after. I began to feel like the trail itself was alive, like every tree, every root, every shadow had learned my rhythm and was keeping pace. The ridge narrowed even more, and panic set in. My legs moved faster than my thoughts could follow. I didn't care about reaching any summit, didn't care about the view I had come for. The whispers came again, faint now, almost carried by the wind, indistinct syllables. My name, repeated, stretched thin. Each repetition made my skin crawl more, as though the voice was clawing at something inside me, testing whether I would break. I stumbled over a root, hands hitting dirt, and the clicks went silent. That pause was worse than sound. The silence pressed against me like a wall, heavy, anticipating. I made it to the end of the ridge as the sky lightened slightly, pale gray seeping through the trees. I dared a glance over my shoulder, just a fraction, and saw nothing but trunks and mist. But the feeling of being watched didn't leave. I kept moving, letting instinct take over, choosing paths I knew would descend quickly. I didn't stop. I didn't let my eyes wander. Every sense was focused on the pressure, the expectation, the invisible weight of eyes pressing against me from every side. It took me nearly an hour to reach a wider trail, to feel the forest's grip loosen, to sense that the pines weren't leaning in anymore. Only then did I allow myself to slow, to take a long breath and glance back. The ridge behind me was quiet, normal even, except that the silence felt deliberate, like the forest itself had swallowed something whole. The figure never reappeared. The clicks never came again. The whisper faded completely. But the memory of those needles bent inward at my boots, the proof of something unseen, standing too close, watching too long, has stayed with me. I haven't returned to that trail. I still hike other ridges, other forests, but there's a part of me that always looks to the edges, counting shadows, tracing shapes between trees, wondering if something is following at the corners of perception. That day on the ridge taught me that the forest holds more than wood and rock. It holds patience, awareness, and a memory of every step I take. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear faint clicks in my mind, like teeth tapping together, reminding me of the watcher in the pines. I'd been hiking all morning, following a long switchback that wound itself lazily up the side of the ridge. The forest was quiet, quieter than usual, like the trees had stopped breathing, and even the wind seemed unsure of itself. I was somewhere between where the trail curved sharply and where it should have leveled out, when the landscape began to feel unfamiliar. I looked back, trying to spot the marker I'd passed 30 minutes ago, but the trail behind me seemed to shift in ways that didn't make sense. Roots curled differently, rocks sat in places I didn't remember, and the faint sound of a distant stream seemed to have moved a few hundred feet. I realized I'd wandered onto an unmarked path. As I paused, trying to retrace my steps, I noticed it, a small cabin tucked between a stand of poplars, almost invisible among the yellowed leaves. No smoke curled from a chimney, no light gleamed from a window, but the door was slightly ajar, cracked open like someone had stepped out in a hurry and never returned. There was something deliberate about the way it sat there, as if it had been waiting for me to notice. My instinct screamed to turn away, but curiosity, or maybe stubbornness, propelled me forward. The moment I stepped inside, the air shifted. Dust coated the furniture, the shelves, the beams overhead, hanging thick in the shafts of light from the small windows. The smell of damp wood and neglect pressed against my nose. Yet, on the floor, there was a single clean footprint, leading deeper into the cabin. No other prints approached it, none departed. The path was solitary, intentional. My skin prickled. Whoever had been here had left deliberately. The walls were lined with Polaroids, hundreds of them, all taken from a distance. Hikers captured mid-step on various trails, unaware, oblivious to the camera. Some photos were old, yellowed, and curling at the edges. Others were fresh. I recognized markers from the trail I'd been on just this morning. My heartbeat accelerated, the cabin suddenly feeling smaller, tighter, like it was pressing in on me. Then I noticed it. Pinned in the center of the wall, a single photograph caught my eye. My own face stared back. Taken just hours earlier, from a spot on the trail where I had been alone. No one had been there. No one could have seen me. My pulse jumped so hard I thought it might shatter ribs. Every instinct screamed to move, but my feet felt like stone. I backed toward the door slowly, desperate for distance, and then a floorboard creaked behind me. The sound was precise, deliberate, and it landed exactly where the clean footprint ended. I didn't look. I couldn't. I turned and ran. Branches tore at my arms, roots snagged my boots, and the air seemed to thicken as I tore back toward the main trail. When I finally broke into the open, panting and bleeding from scratches, the cabin was gone. The trees swayed in the same indifferent way as before, the sun catching in yellowed leaves, but there was no sign of it between the poplars, not even the faint outline that could have suggested it had existed. Later I checked every map I could find. Nothing. No cabin, no cleared patch, no history of a building ever standing there. I tried to rationalize what I'd seen. An elaborate prank, a hallucination, exhaustion playing tricks on my mind. But the photograph, the one of me, remained vivid in my memory, impossible to reconcile with any logical explanation. Even now, when I hike that ridge, I can't shake the sense that something watches from the trees. That there are paths that shouldn't exist, and buildings that are not on any map, waiting. Waiting for the next hiker who wanders too far, who looks too closely, or who believes for a moment that curiosity is stronger than fear. I don't venture near that area anymore. The forest has a way of remembering, and I've learned that some things once seen cannot be unseen.